Today, I'm going to share the story that I've never shared before about when I lost everything. And I'm talking everything. Many of you know I was a stockbroker for 20 years before I got into real estate. I'm going to share exactly what that experience was like. I've never told this story before, but I feel compelled to because there are a lot of folks that are about to lose everything. Now, let me be perfectly and abundantly clear. The Florida housing market, as of today, as of right now, leading, well, it's never leading, it's always lagging, but the housing market data in every metro within Florida and in my market all support that the real estate market is going higher, not depreciating, not going down. There is no housing recession. There is no crash coming if you look at today's data, period. So if that's what you're hoping for, that's not going to happen anytime soon. However, it will definitely happen. And I'm going to share what happened to me. But before I get into that, I think it's important that we understand that right now, as of today, we continue to be lied to because the CPI numbers came out yesterday. Inflation, great news. It's down to 4.9%. CPI is down to 4.9%. Woohoo! Congratulations. We're at 4.9% inflation. After all of the tightening that the Fed has done and all of the risk, systemic risk that they have created because of this tightening, it only decreased inflation by 0.1% from last month. That's not good. That's not a win. That's terrible. And we're in trouble. The system is in trouble. And there are a lot of folks at risk. Now, currently, today's news, right? So the headline news is inflation is easing, 4.9%. Mortgage interest rates are going down, as I predicted. And like I predicted, they were going to sell this to us in a way that this is great news. It's not. So let's get into exactly what's happening right now. Because right now, Janet Yellen said failure to avoid a U.S. default would undermine its ability to defend national security. That's interesting. National security. I don't talk much about that, but let's just have a brief overview of what that looks like. And all the money that we are putting out there to other countries to not be involved in the war in Ukraine. Morning. So we're not involved in the war in Ukraine, right? Okay. Well, what are we doing? So let me put this into a real world example. My neighbors are fighting, and I go over to one neighbor and give him a pile of rocks, and I arm him with this pile of rocks, and I don't get involved because I'm not going to get involved, right? I don't want to be that guy, but okay, I'm giving him the rock, and he takes those rocks and he throws them at the other neighbor, and he injures the other neighbor, and he pummels the other neighbor. Well, I didn't throw the rocks, so therefore I'm not involved, right? No, wrong. So we're spending an enormous amount of money. The United States is spending an enormous amount of money in all types of places that are not domestic, and we can't afford anything. The national debt level is through the effing roof. And yet we continue to finance and fund these wars. Meanwhile, the commercial real estate space is getting decimated. Pension funds, which are tied to them, are getting decimated. And I talked about it yesterday. The government's going to bail out all of these things. They have to, or there'll be civil unrest, no doubt. Okay. Social Security is going bankrupt. It will also have to be bailed out. So, and that's just, this is high level stuff. There's much more problems, much more. We are hemorrhaging cash. The United States is bankrupt. That's what it is. And this debt ceiling nonsense is just the ability to keep our heads above water and continue to play the game as we continue to lose power um, throughout the world. Okay. So she goes on to say, it will spark a global downturn. Well, no shit. That is an understatement. Um, they're going to politicize this. They're going to posture. They're going to do what they do. And at the end of the day, what's going to happen is they're going to raise the debt ceiling. And if they don't, which Donald Trump just said, don't, what he said was what he's urging Republicans to do is extract concessions on spending or push the US into default. If you don't get these massive cuts, you're going to have to do a default. That is what Donald Trump says. And whether you agree with him or disagree with him is irrelevant. It's what he said. And warning, the truth is, I don't know that he's wrong because we have continued to kick the can down the road. And it's only going to get worse from here. People are going to lose everything. Now, before I talk about how I lost everything, because I lost everything, I lost every single thing. I had no intention of ever being a realtor. I had no intention of ever being a real estate professional. I never had ever any interest in ever being on YouTube. These are all things that I had to do because I lost everything. So I'm going to talk about that in a second. But what do we have happening? So the banks are failing. They will continue to fail as the auto crisis and the subprime predatory loans continue to plague the market and continue to and those vehicles get repossessed and those banks eventually realize those losses. There will be more systemic failure throughout the banking system, and that will have to be bailed out again. But big banks and Uncle Sam are in bed together, so it really doesn't matter unless it's us. And it is. This is us. We are losing everything. But you can't say that because that's not an electable position. But the United States is losing everything, no doubt. Anyhow, Blackstone. You know Blackstone, right? Blackstone, who has an enormous amount of money sitting on the sideline, waiting to capitalize on the undervalued assets that become on fire sale, like real estate. They are capitalized to take advantage of every market opportunity that exists when everything fails and everybody loses everything. I'll tell you who will not lose everything: Blackstone, because they are capitalized the right way. And I hope you are too. I know I will be, because I've lost everything before and I'll never do it again. And if you lose everything, you can earn it back. Anyhow, let's keep going. Blackstone reaffirmed in its talks with regional banks that banks making loans to Blackstone, they will hold the debt to maturity. The insurers would pay Blackstone for directing assets their way. Huh. What did I just say? I just told you that Blackstone is capitalized to take advantage of all these opportunities. They're doing it right now. So you can bet your sweet bippy that they're going to continue to do so. And that's just a fact. Now, what's another name in the news? Well, Credit Suisse. They have been overseeing the default swap market. And let's talk about credit default swaps, right? What is a credit default swap? What does that mean? Most people don't really know. And I'll just describe it in layman's terms. Credit default swap is basically an insurance contract which protects the buyer from default of whatever the underlying asset is. And it's insurance. If I'm making a massive bet and I want to ensure that the thing I'm betting on doesn't default, I can buy a credit default swap, and that will protect me up until it doesn't. Because what happens when the institutions that insure these credit default swaps don't have the money to pay on the trillions of dollars of credit default swap claims. Well, I'll tell you what happens. Everybody loses everything. And I lost everything. So I know what it's like. I understand that people are going to lose everything. And that's why I'm compelled to share my story about when I actually did lose everything. And to be clear, it didn't matter that I had survived and thrived in every bull and bear market. It didn't matter that I had made my clients and myself a fortune during the great financial crisis. It didn't matter about anything because when you lose everything, nobody gives you a notice in advance. It was a black swan event in my life. I did not see it coming. I was not prepared. And although I was in a better position than many people when they lose everything, it still is like a death. I was terrified. I've never been more afraid of anything in my entire life. It was a horror show because I also didn't think I knew how to do anything other than be a stockbroker. I was devastated. I was panicked. I thought I was dying. I've never been in more distress in my life. So please understand that I know what it feels like when the shit hits the fan. I've been there, and I'm sharing all of this with you because, yes, right now, the housing market in Florida looks great. And I also suspect that home values in Florida are going to continue to uptick. It wouldn't shock me if they go significantly higher because they're playing games with inflation numbers and they're playing games to manipulate the system and they're playing games to bring down mortgage interest rates. And so the market could fly. And yet, you could lose everything. And that's why I'm sharing my story. But as many of you know, I was a stockbroker for 20 years. I ran an extremely clean business. I had zero marks on my record and never did the wrong thing by a client, always made suitable recommendations, always did my best to outperform the market. And a lot of times I did, not every time, but everyone that I worked with knew what the risks were, knew what they were getting involved in, and everything was a suitable recommendation, and we were aggressively trading. Nonetheless, I did that for 20 years and I thought I would do it forever. And I was always the first one there and the last one to leave. I was always the hardest worker in the room. I was always the guy. And yet, one day I came into work and the office had been raided by the FBI. It had been raided by the SEC. It had been raided by FINRA. There were police officers or FBI agents at the door. And it was terrifying. But I also knew I hadn't done anything wrong. So, despite the fact that optically this was very terrifying, I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. And so we were audited. And what we came to learn that unbeknownst to us was the fact that there was another office somewhere else in the country. They were running a Ponzi scheme and they got busted. And so every other office that was part of this franchise then was audited too. And the great news was 6 months later, we found, as I already knew, that we had done nothing wrong. We had survived the audit. And they let us know that congratulations, you're not out of business, no harm, no foul. However, there are going to be some changes made. Number one, we would not be allowed to make outbound phone calls, which, in case you don't know, instantly put me out of business. But then, over and above that, we were also told we could no longer trade securities. We could only buy insurance based products. Well, that would be great if that's what I did, but that's not what I did. So I knew immediately that my stock brokerage career was over. And I have never felt more fear or more terror around anything. I have never been more panicked or more terrified of anything because I had lost everything. $0 coming in, zero anything coming in. Fear, despair, hopelessness, all of it. I felt like the world's biggest loser. I felt like a total piece of trash. I felt completely worthless. I felt like the only thing that I could do was be a stockbroker. And now I had zero potential of making anything like what I ever made before. I was trapped by the golden handcuffs, and the golden handcuffs had just thrown me into the electric chair. It was over. I was done. And I had never felt more financial responsibility in my life because now I was about to be a father. I was just married. And very shortly thereafter, we had another child. So I got two kids to pay for and a family to feed and a lifestyle I've become accustomed to that was completely ripped away instantly. And my new income was zero. So I can tell you, I know for certain what it feels to be afraid of the future. And I absolutely know what it feels like to feel the terror of financial burden with zero income. And also the limiting belief that the only thing that I was good for, the only thing that I knew how to do, because it's the only thing I had done for 20 years, was be a stockbroker. I did not know what I was going to do next. And I was terrified. And all the things that I had at that time that I could not afford anymore, I had to sell, period, because I had to survive. I had to stay alive. I had to be able to fund my lifestyle for my family. And our lifestyle took a massive hit because I was making $0 moving forward up until I wasn't. And so my motivation to learn something and pivot and become an expert in whatever the next thing is was extremely high. And thankfully, that's exactly what I did. And whatever nonsense I was telling myself about not knowing how to do something, or I was too old, or this, that, and the other thing, none of that bullshit mattered. I had to get to work instantly. And I knew that the real estate industry would provide me an opportunity to potentially have a limitless upside if I could figure out how to do it. And I can promise you, not one of my clients in my stock brokerage career had any interest in doing business with me moving forward. So I had zero client base. I had to start over from zero. And my pride and ego had to take a massive hit because I was no longer the big shot who had the corner glass office, who could go and do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted to, and always foot the bill. Those days were over. I had to go to work. I had to learn a new industry and I had to figure it out. And it was horrible. I was terrible. I was the world's worst realtor when I first started. My first sale wasn't even a sale of a house. I sold a mobile home. It was a car. That was my first transaction. And the price point was $40,000. I made no money. I worked my ass off to make that sale and I made no money, but I figured it out. And I share that story because it's the truth. And thankfully, today, my real estate business is thriving and those price points are significantly higher than 45,000, but I worked my ass off and earned it. And so can anybody else. And while this wasn't intended to be a motivational speech about you can do anything you set your mind to, the truth is you can. And the truth is, right now, there are a lot of folks out there that don't know which way to go as it relates to buying or selling. They don't know if the market's going up or down. I don't know either. I can only tell you what I think will happen. And for right now, the trends look strong up until they don't. But anybody not paying attention to the fact that we have global issues and economic issues that are about to cripple us is insane. Because the truth is, when you lose everything, there's normally not a notice. Nobody told me a year in advance so I could prepare. Hey, Chris, you're about to lose everything. But guess what? I'm telling it to you now. And the truth is, you don't have to lose everything, but you must be prepared for what is likely to happen. And I'm always going to tell you the truth. Now, I hope you found this content valuable. And if you did, please subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend. If you're even thinking about buying or selling anywhere, please reach out because we would love to help. And check out my next video because I suspect you will love it a lot. And until next time, peace.